Now there's a brand new webpage especially for this podcast. The Politicrat Daily Podcast can now be found on thepoliticrat.com, a brand new page that centralizes all of the places that you can listen to this podcast, the major platforms, and many others at thepoliticrat.com. Lots of content that you can see there right now and every single day. So subscribe now to the Politicrat Daily Podcast and make sure you visit thepoliticrat.com. Thank you. Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Thursday, January the 28th, 2021. On this edition of The Politicrat, a conversation with Dr. Roy Sawh and Jenny Lawther. Dr. Roy Sawh is a freedom fighter and activist in the Black liberation struggle. He is a legendary figure, a living legend, and his impact on Black liberation movements was felt particularly in England in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, and beyond, at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, London. The memories, the mission, the movement, and the love of his life, Jenny Lawther, all to be discussed coming up next. Well, with me now on the Politicrat Daily Podcast, I have the unique honor and pleasure and privilege to speak to two wonderful people that you are about to meet, all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Jenny Lawther and Dr. Roy Sawh. Now, let me just tell you something about the two of them, and we will speak to them in a very few short moments. Jenny and Roy are a wonderful, wonderful couple, and we will get into how they got to meet. And I would love to introduce you right now to Dr. Roy Sawh, who is an activist, a Black liberation freedom fighter, somebody who is a Black man who has spoken truth to power for many a day, most notably on Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London, where hundreds of people would gather to see a man who not only spoke truth to power, but got to really be involved in the Black liberation struggle. Dr. Roy Sawh and Jenny Lawther, welcome to the Politicrat Daily Podcast today.
Thank you very much for that introduction.
You're most welcome, sir. And your work precedes you. And I would like to start, if you don't mind, Dr. Roy, by asking you about your evolution from Guyana to London and your journey from there as a youngster and your movements and your travels to London. If you can talk a little bit about that, sir, for the sake of introduction to the listening and viewing audience, please.
Yeah, sure. We can talk about anything and everything if you have the time, because it's going to take a lot of time.
Wonderful. I do.
Where are you from, brother?
I am from London originally. My parents are from Barbados. And I can tell you that my father, who is in New York at the moment, has been in New York, saw you on Speaker's Corner many a time. And I really wish that he would be able to be up to talk to you. But it's pretty late where he is at the moment. And he saw you. So it was an honor. And he says to say hello to you as well, sir.
Thank you very much. I lived in Barbados for 2 years. I used to live in Spicetown.
Wonderful. He's from Spicetown. So there you go.
Oh, probably I know him because we used to meet in the fish market playing dominoes in the evening.
Ah, yes, I have. I bet you probably have met him. I'm going to relay that to him next time I speak to him. Wow, this is really good. This really hits home for me even more now that we're having this interaction together. So, talking about your evolution to this place in your life, sir, coming from Guyana, coming to London, and that kind of transition and your formative experiences and your adversities, your ups and downs. Can you talk a little bit about that as a prelude to your activism and freedom fighting for the Black liberation struggle?
Well, I was born in a sugar state, and like sugar states in the Barbados, you know what goes with it. And growing up in a sugar state, you see the injustices that was taking place, but you were incapable because you didn't have the know-how or the power to do or change anything. And therefore, that was with me all the time. So when I went to Britain, I went there primarily to get an education. I wanted to be an accountant, and I would return home and get a good job and look after my family. And that was the motive that drove me to go to England. And I didn't have a job, and I used to gamble. Every time I won some money, I would save it and build it up. And that was my passage I was accumulating to come to Britain.
Wonderful.
And you know in Barbados how they dominoes.
Yes.
And I used to play with the Barbadians in the fish market. There's a guy called Red who was supposed to be a top domino man. And I used to play with him, and we used to get on very well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's a lovely story.
I love my stay in Barbados, but it got very expensive, so one had to leave.
Right.
Because you know how the economy runs in Barbados.
Yes. 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 Absolutely. Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. I must say to you that London back in the 1960s, setting the landscape for listeners and viewers who may not be aware, there were the uprisings in the 1950s. You had Enoch, I guess it was called the Teddy Boy riots. I don't know if that was the exact name for it in 58.
That's right, Teddy Boy.
It was, right. Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Sawh. And that was in the mid to late 50s. Then, of course, the 1960s came along and further upheaval and the assaults by police on black people. And, of course, you had the River Tiber speech by Enoch Powell, the racist politician in the Conservative Party, who spoke of rivers of blood. And then into all of that, a few years after, you had Mangrove, I believe in 1968. The Mangrove, the incursion by police on black people in London and other parts of London. And I believe into that stepped yourself in roughly, I think it was 1968. Your entry into activism, sir. Can you speak a little bit about what galvanized you in Speaker's Corner to begin to do the incredibly liberating and encouraging and inspiring things you did in that day in Hyde Park?
Well, I don't know how I got involved, but I got involved. Because at that time, for us to get a job and get somewhere to live was an impossible task. So I got a job walking down Oxford Street. I saw a black brother from Jamaica. So I went up and I spoke to him and said to him, I was looking for a job. I just arrived and it's difficult to get a job. And he told me, meet him at the Cumberland Hotel at Marble Arch. So I went the next day and I met him and he introduced me to the manager of the hotel and I got a job. You know, my first job was in England,
No.
the mother country, cleaning toilets.
No, really?
Yep, first job cleaning toilets,
Wow.
and then Cumberland Hotel was next door, and I used to pass there and see all the black brothers and sisters working, and I asked them if they have a vacancy in the job because I feel comfortable working with my brothers than I was working alone. And when I finished my shift at 2:00, I saw all these people in the Hyde Park standing up listening to speakers. So I thought I'd go along. And I went along and I was listening. And the black brother was there, Matthews, Mr. Matthews, he had a platform. And I said, brother, can I say a few words? I'm from Guyana, British Guyana. So I went up and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm from Guyana. Somebody shouted, go home, Ghana is independent. They didn't know the difference between Guyana and Ghana.
Right, exactly. I think Ghana got its independence in the late 1950s, did it not? I'm not 100% sure.
Under Nkrumah.
Right, absolutely, yes. So continue, sir.
So every Sunday I used to go back when I finished work at 2:00 and stand up and get on a platform. Then I decided to walk with my own soapbox, and I walk with my box when I stand up as my platform, and I spoke every Sunday. But then I realized that I didn't know very much about the world. So I started to read the newspapers. If I go down the high street and I saw a paper in the bin, I would pick it up and I'd take it home and I'd read it in the night. And that's where I got my information. Not education. The education came later, but I got my information from the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how it all started.
Wow. And I must say, I'm sorry, go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
And then they had the Teddy Boy race riots in 58. And we were walking along the streets, and the Teddy Boys would come up and just tap you on the shoulder, and when you turn around, they would box you or slap you, and physically. And when you go to the police and report it, they ignore you. They didn't take any notice of what you were saying. And then when we reacted, we were charged for misbehavior in public. And when we went to the police station, they used to take black brothers and put their head in the toilet and pull the chain and say, that's where a nigger should go. And I had given my telephone number to a few black people. So when anybody got arrested and they rang me, I had to go to the station to bail them out. And one morning I went there about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was so much in a hurry, I forgot to take my trousers off, and I had my pajamas still on when I went to the station. This was in Harrow Road, 3 o'clock in the morning. Can you imagine that?
Oh, no.
And that's how it all started, because we got together, and we didn't know what to do and where to go. And the only organization that was there was called West Indian Standing Conference. And when we went there, they were more intellectual than practical. And we decided to get together and form our own organization. And that's how it all started.
Wonderful. And you, I mean, from that time on, a real galvanizing force. One of the things that struck me, and I had seen some old footage, I knew of you. I had never seen you live. But I can say one of the things that comes across, and I have here, and I should tell the viewers and listeners, From Where I Stand, which is a book that
Oh, yeah.
has some of your oratory in it and some reflections that you write about, some from the 1980s, some perhaps from a little bit earlier. From Where I Stand, for those listening and watching, you really must get your hands on this book and read it. It's a fascinating travelogue of Dr. Roy Sawh's journey, activism, the people he met. Oh my goodness, and I'm going to ask you about that in a few moments. But I first, Dr. Sawh, want to ask you about your oratory and your sense of humor and how you weave those things together to such great effect. Because the times were so urgent. Black people were being oppressed to such levels, and that has not necessarily changed at all. But such levels back then that were so in your face. And for you to be at Speaker's Corner and somehow manage to engage a crowd of diverse people and use humor to do it, I'm fascinated by that. Why was humor the best way or the better way for you to get your message across? Because you used a lot of rhetoric that was so incredibly vivid, but you also use humor. Can you talk about how you weave those together like that at that time?
Well, I was speaking there and I spoke for a couple of months, and I thought I would take a serious approach to presentation of the history, because all this nonsense about how the English came to civilize us, and then all the civilization they did, we still had discrimination. So one Sunday, I got up and I was speaking, and somebody said to me, if you were in South Africa, how would you solve the problem? Oh, I said, very easy. They say, what do you mean easy? Nelson Mandela is in jail for fighting for equality in South Africa. I said, no, you could solve the problem. And they say, how? I said, look, every white family has a black cook, 2 ounces of rat poison, and you solve the problem overnight.
Oh, oh my gosh, I didn't expect you to say that. Oh, that's so funny. I mean, your sense of humor is, again, and you weave that together so well, and that makes you a magnet. You have a magnetism about you, sir, and that has not differed to this very moment that we are speaking here.
Yeah, but then the way I turned to that, because the policemen were there taking notes, and then I got arrested under the Race Relations Act. The act that came out to protect me, I got arrested under that act for inciting racial violence. How can a minority incite racial violence against a majority? And then that's when I switched, because I got arrested. I went to jail. I spent 3 months. I didn't complete it because a friend of mine in Sweden, he read about the story in the Times, and he flew over, and he came, and he paid the £120 fine, because £120 fine in 1958, 1959 was a lot of money for me, because washing dishes I was only getting £6 a week. And out of that, I had to pay £3, and I sent 10 shillings home every week. So what I left with, I had to live on. So it wasn't easy. It was pretty hard. And then that's where I decided to switch to humor. But I will get my points through, because who will stand there and listen to you for 4 or 5 hours? You have to have something to give people, for people to stay. And that's how the humor came into it all. And the other one I said was, if you get me angry, most of the doctors now coming to Britain are from India. And if you get me angry, I'll tell them to give you the wrong injection at the right time.
It's just so wonderful to hear you speaking about these these things that you've gone through and these experiences. And I hope that those of you listening and watching are really getting a measure of Dr. Sawh. This is somebody that you're witnessing who really is a giant in the Black liberation struggle. I really honestly mean that. And I hope that people who are listening and watching do take account, watch some of the videos of Roy, read the book From Where I Stand. It's just fascinating. And just you will learn a lot. And you spoke, Dr. Sawh, a moment ago about the 3 months. That was originally, I believe, was that not a 5-year sentence that originally was given to you?
No, it was 4. I had 4 charges, same charges on 4 different Sundays. Mm-hmm. And it was 30 pounds each. So that was 120 pounds.
I see. I do want to ask you a couple of other things that really galvanize my way of thinking about these things. It was really refreshing to hear about you and that you identify as a black man that you are, because I'm sure you've probably been asked this a lot. When you say that you're a black man, what kind of reaction are you getting from some people? I'm sure you've been asked this a million times. I, for one, am so happy that you have clearly made it clear you're a black man, and you are. And I'm just so thankful, because a lot of people do not come out and say that, which is a sad thing that they don't. But I'm so happy that you have. But I want to ask you, Doctor, what kinds of reactions were you getting from people, whether they were black, whether they were white, whether they were from India, Guyana, when you said that you were a black man? When you say that you're a black man, what kind of reaction do you get?
I got some funny reaction. First thing people say, "Oh, you're not black." And I used to say, "Did you go to school? Did they teach you, when they were teaching you the colors of the world and the colors that exist, that they give you a name for every color?" I said, the opposite to black, to white is black. Not brown, not yellow, black. And if we're talking in terms of the world, because the problem that existed in those days existed in the world with black people and white people. So when you don't tell me about people with color, because white people, when they stay in the sun, they get color too, like me. So don't tell me that. So from that point of view, we are black. And I said, I'm black. I'm not, Indian is not a color. Afro is not a color. The color is either black. And when you say black, you know who you mean. And when you say white, you know who you mean.
Precisely. And you met a lot of very heralded figures in the liberation struggle, pursuant to or after the 1970s, if not before then. I know that you had got to meet Cassius Clay before he was Muhammad Ali, and maybe you got to meet him again when he was Muhammad Ali. And
yes,
I know,
that's right.
Yes, and I also know that you got to meet none other than Stokely Carmichael, who of course later became Kwame Ture. Can you talk about meeting, and those are just 2 of the people I've named. You've met others too, but can you talk about your experiences meeting them and the kinds of interactions you had with those 2 very fascinating figures, also in the same Black liberation struggle?
Well, it was fascinating. It was an honor to meet Muhammad Ali, because we sat down over dinner. We met at the dinner in Bayswater, and then we went back to his hotel, and we sat there nearly the whole night, and we were talking about the situation. And the point I liked with him was when he said that when he came back from Cuba after winning the match, the boxing match, and he was strong, And when he came back to the States, he went into a restaurant and I ordered something to eat. And the lady said to him, "We don't serve colored people." He said, "Look, colored people, man, I'm not colored, I am black. Serve me. I don't eat colored people. Will you serve me?" And I thought that was so fascinating. And the way he said it was so fascinating. And then with Stokely giving us his experience as a student coming up when they formed SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Violent Coordinating Committee, and to listen to two brothers gave me more power mentally that we can get through with this struggle. We should fight for it. Don't give up and just carry on. And we just carry on.
Wonderful. And Stokely Carmichael, of course, who became Kwame Ture as well, as I mentioned earlier. Also from Trinidad, too, as I understand. He is originally...
Yes, he was born in Trinidad.
Right. And as you point out, SNCC, exactly. I think he became the leader of SNCC at one point.
That's right.
Did you get to meet Malcolm X by any chance? Because I know you talk about him in the book. You've talked about your impressions of him and what he meant to you and things of that nature and what he stood for, like yourself. Did you ever get to meet Malcolm?
No, I didn't, because when he came to London, Michael X had arranged meetings for him. And some of the meetings they had arranged, I couldn't go to them because I didn't have the fares, I didn't have the money to go, and therefore I didn't have the chance to meet him. He was the only one that I didn't meet. But I spoke to him on the telephone when he was in England and when he was going back. And the thing that impressed me with him was when he was talking about the Black Revolution in America, he was talking about America as America. He did not include other countries or other instances in other countries. And when he was about to leave, because they served him a notice to deport him, I couldn't meet him personally, but I spoke to him to say goodbye and farewell.
Oh, wow.
And then 6 months later, we heard he got killed, assassinated by one of our own people.
Yeah, absolutely. That was fair. And we are closing in, sadly, on yet another commemorative
and
year.
And then when Stokely married this woman in Africa, he changed his name to Kwame Ture.
Yes, Kwame Ture, indeed. And neither of them, unfortunately, are presently with us. I mean, they're with us in spirit, but physically they're no longer with us. But yes, February 21st, 1965, my goodness me, the Audubon Ballroom. And as you point out, killed by one of our own people. It just hurts every time. It really does with Malcolm and with any of the people who fought for us and fought for the humanity of Black people, the respect, the justice, and all of those things. So yeah, I mean that has special resonance for me, sir. I did want to ask you, Jenny, just for a moment about how you and Roy got to meet. You're partners in life, married, you're together. But how did you get together? How did you come to meet? If you can say a few words about that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I was on what many Australians do, a work visa in London. I've done some travelling in Europe, and decided I wasn't ready to go home yet. So I was doing the usual sort of little job and do some sightseeing and all of that. So I decided one day that I would go to Hyde Park, Speaker's Corner and see what all that was about. So off I trotted, week before my birthday, late October. And when I got there, there was a very well-dressed suit and tie person standing on a little platform ladder with this big crowd around him. So I thought, oh, okay, this looks like the place to go and have a look. And it was Roy standing on the platform, and he was very entertaining. I was a young Australian girl growing up in white suburban Melbourne, so really knew very little about the black scene or, you know, black people or anything. And it was very, not only entertaining, but interesting. So I stood there for quite a long time, probably, you know, over an hour and a half. And at one point, Roy turned and asked me a question. And of course, I went bright red and made a bit of a joke about it. And I said, oh, my goodness me, you know, I only just speak to her. Imagine if I touched her. And of course, the crowd laughed and I just went redder. And then he asked me a question about the Aborigines, and I formulated an answer, and then, you know, he carried on with his speaking. Anyway, I sort of stayed around for about another half an hour, and then I went to listen to some of the other speakers who I have to say were not a patch on Roy. And I got chatting to someone and they asked me for a coffee, and it was starting to get quite cold. And so we went to McDonald's to have a coffee, and who should be sitting in the table near the doorway but Roy and his friends. And I hadn't really noticed particularly. So we went downstairs and had coffee, and we were coming back up and went to go out, and Roy stopped me and said, oh, I'm sorry if I embarrassed you. And I was like, oh, it's okay, no problem. All a bit overwhelmed just talking to me. And he said, oh, look, it's raining outside. So the guy I was with turned and looked outside. It wasn't raining, by the way. And Roy slipped a number in my pocket and asked me for my number. And apparently he'd been sending his little friends down to keep a check on what was going on, unbeknownst to me. Anyhow, went home, and about 2 hours later I got a phone call from Roy, would you like to come out for a drink? So thinking, oh my God, what am I going to say? You know, this man knows everything, I don't know anything. But anyway, off we went for a drink, and well, pretty much that was it, really. It was, you know, I pretty much didn't go home after that. And 38 years later, we're still together.
Well, congratulations. What a lovely, wonderful couple you make. That's what a wonderful story. That is how romances and marriages and love affairs and friendships and companionships should naturally endure and flow. What a lovely, that is, I mean, if I may say, that is the kind of thing that Hollywood or any kind of movie company needs to do. It's just a lovely, pure story. It's beautiful. And thank you, Jenny, for talking about that. And it must be really wonderful to be with someone who really has such a kaleidoscopic effect on a lot of different people. Was that part of the appeal? I mean, if you don't mind me asking, for gravitating to Dr. Roy, because you talked about the speakers, and he was the one that really stood out for you, and he was able to.
Well, apart from being very good looking, he was entertaining, he was intelligent, and of course, before we talked, I came to know that Roy is a man of principle, you know, and there's not so many of those around these days. You know, he will live and die by his principles. I think I came to admire him. I learned a lot. Obviously, we came from totally different worlds, age groups, everything, and we both learned a lot from each other, I think, and it's sort of expanded my knowledge of the world, and obviously opened me up to a whole, you know, community that I knew nothing about growing up in, you know, suburban Melbourne. And, you know, if you listen to Roy or read some of his writings, you'll find that he was really ahead of his time. Many of the things that he said, you know, back in the 60s and 70s have come to pass. He was really ahead of his time. Yeah, so all of those things really. Yeah.
Wonderful. And yes, I completely agree with you, Jenny. We are in the presence here, for those of you listening and watching, of a living legend. And I really, once again, must emphasize, and I've just got a couple of other quick things I would like to ask, but to the audience watching and listening, I really must emphasize that you are in the presence of someone who is a legendary figure, a tremendously important figure in the Black liberation struggle. His impact and his influence, and the respect and reverence that so many people, not just in England, but many people in other parts of the world have for Dr. Sawh. I mean, people really need to familiarize themselves with the legacy of this living legend that I am honored to speak with.
He reached a lot of people at Speaker's Corners, people that perhaps might not have been touched otherwise. And, we've done a lot of travelling. We've travelled Central and South America, Malaysia, India, Australia. And, in many of those places, we'll be in some obscure somewhere and someone will be going, "Did you speak in Hyde Park?" And, so, there are people everywhere that he has touched, in some way. Even when we were in the taxi travelling to the airport in London to come to Australia, pre-COVID, I might add, the taxi driver was talking about this Roy Sawh who talked in Hyde Park, and I said, "This is him?" And he was like, no, he's dead. Because there was a Roy Sawh from Guyana who passed away some years ago, and a lot of people thought it was this Roy, but it wasn't. And I said, no, this is Roy. And he was so overwhelmed that he rang his friend who was in the Netherlands and got Roy to speak to him on the phone. So those sorts of things happen. So
wow.
Lots of people pass through Hyde Park and, it's changed perhaps their way of looking at things or, made them laugh and then think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Reading from where I stand, some of the things that you say, Dr. Roy, it's just terrific. It's just, you paint a picture, you get your point across, you make people think, as Jenny, as you point out, and you always leave people wanting more and seeking more and wanting to become a part of the struggle, which is a struggle that continues on. And that's really my next line of the last couple of questions I have for you. One of them is, Dr. Roy, how do you look at what's happening today with Black Lives Matter? Because really the Black Lives Matter movement, and I say this on my podcast quite often actually, is a movement that's gone on for at least 400 years. It's not really something that started in 2020. But I do want to ask you, this latest iteration of Black Lives Matter, what do you think about what the generation today is doing in that particular movement? If you'd like to say a few things about it, please.
Well, coming from America, of all countries in the world, which is supposed to be democratic and the only free society in the world, and what we're looking now and see what's happening with the president and the whole constitution and our police are shooting people, shoot now and ask questions later. It makes you wonder, where are the black community going? I am not the type who gives answers or finds solutions to the discrimination that's happening in other parts of the world. The brothers there have got to work it out, and they have got to decide, because they understand the society they live. They know the shortcomings, and they know the advantages. I believe that they will have to keep on with the struggle, but they will have to define and continue the struggle as they see it, not as they seen by other people, because you can't rely now on other people to fight your battle. You have to fight your own battle. And I think the brothers and sisters of America have got to get together and try and find solutions to that problem. It's not going to come from heaven. It's not going to come from England. It's not going to come from hell. You have to do it yourself. Like how we did it in Britain in 58. We had no black organization. Today, we had little groups coming up all over the place. And we passed the stage, Black Lives Matter. In England, we're moving on. We're moving on because we got Black History Month. We got the Free University of Black Studies. We have moved on, and we have to move on because it's easy and good to talk about racial integration. But what is racial integration? How can two unequal things integrate? I can integrate if I know my language. I don't. Look in Guyana. I never knew Indians in Guyana came from India. I only knew that when I came to Britain and I started to read the history books. And I was so surprised because they got Chinese, they got Africans. It's all come through slavery and indentured workers. And they came because the sugar at that time was 1 pound a pound. And the European countries all planted sugar in black countries because it produced money and revenue for their country. And we have got to find our own solution, our own methodology to continue the struggle. And we will win. It will take time, but we will win.
And yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I am fully on board and confident about as well. We are going to win. Ultimately, we will, and perseverance is very important. I think one of the last things I do want to ask you, Dr. Roy, is about what we've seen lately in England, about the government that we see with Boris Johnson and this Brexit, perhaps if you wanted to say something about that, and also the statues that had been toppled last summer, and then there were lots of statues of enslavers and other people. Cecil Rhodes, I believe, as well, in Oxford, had been toppled. Do you care to share your views on those subjects, please?
Well, the reason why it's being toppled is because the people, or some of the people, don't want to be reminded of the past, or some people hate what went on and who do not expect to have not only black people, but have statues of black people. Because they were supposed to build shrines for Gandhi and Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King, and it was never done because it's white nations who have got to build black statues. And black, I mean non-white people, because their history ties back to Europe. And if you go back and look at the history, everywhere and anywhere the English have been in anybody else's country, they have got legalization of immigration laws. In America, they call it the McCarran Act. In Canada, they call it the Anti-Asiatic White Preferential Immigration Bill. In New Zealand, they call it the Selected Migration Scheme. In Australia, they call it the White Australian Policy. And in England, because they're the most sophisticated of the English people, they call it the Commonwealth Immigration Act.
I tell you, and I really, there's so many things I want to ask you, and I really
you can ask me
because you talk about this in the book too, about English people in general being stupid and not very smart. And when I read that, Dr. Roy, I immediately thought of the English media, the right-wing press, the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Daily Telegraph, and the silly headlines, and all the other ones that operate from that bent, and they're not, and it's designed to dumb down the public. And your words just struck a chord with me, because I remember growing up in England, and these headlines would be the silliest headlines, but people would eat that up and they would believe it. Can you talk about that whole thing about England and just I remember going to football matches in the 1970s and into the 80s, and they were you had some of the white fans racially abusing black players on the opposite team. And the team that they supported had black players on it. And they were racially abusing black players on the other side. And I remember one of these teams' players from the guys who were abusing the other team, one of the players came up and confronted one of the fans for his team and said, "Do you mean him or do you mean me?" when he's calling him these names. So that stupidity that you talk about, it hits home again because I remember this growing up. I would just love to get your thoughts about that, because when I read that in the book, I thought, wow, yes, Dr. Roy is talking about something that I've been thinking and feeling for many years. I really would like, if you care to elaborate on the mentality, the English mentality. I think you talked about that, if I remember correctly.
Well, the point is, when I got to Britain, I saw a white man cleaning shoes in Leicester Square. I couldn't believe it. I thought he was German. They captured him in the war and they brought him back to England to do the dirty jobs. I didn't believe. So I went and I saved my money and I bought a camera, a Kodak, never forget. And I went and I took pictures. And I asked him, "Brother, where are you from?" He says, "I'm English. I'm from England." I said, "But you're cleaning shoes. English people don't do that." He said, "Where do you come from?" I said, "I come from British Guyana." He said, "Oh, they're not primitive. They're primitive. They're uncivilized." And I sent a picture home to my parents, and they couldn't believe that a white man was cleaning shoes in Leicester Square. And then when we arrived, we saw how the working class lived, and we realized that if this is the way they treat their own people, then who are we? Like when Gandhi came to England and was asking for independence, Churchill called him a naked kafir. And Gandhi said, if all the Indians came to India and spit once, England will be like a little canoe and float away. And he was charged with sedition and went to jail, 6 months in jail for that. Mm. And if you notice that in all the black Commonwealth countries, 99% of the leaders, Kenyatta, Gandhi, Nkrumah, all of them went to jail before they got their independence. And when people say, "Why did you go to jail?" I said, "I was doing my apprenticeship."
Oh, that's just priceless. See, this is this is one of the reasons why it's such an honor to speak with you both. And your humor and your wit, and your incisive analysis of what these issues are, and your advocacy are the things that I cherish, and the way that you speak about England. Because one other thing I wanted to say before I forget is that many times I would experience this as a younger person, and as a kid growing up, I would be called all kinds of names, or at least sometimes I would be, and then other times these guys would say things about another group or another group of black people, and they said, "No offense, I don't mean you, I mean them." And that's like, again, this English mentality. It was just so backwards and so stupid and so offensive too. And that, again, it resonated with me, Dr. Sawh, when you talk about this in the book. I remember one passage when you recalled and you said that the food and the things that this guy, the white man, was eating and drinking came from black countries. And then he's telling black people to get out of England. And yet all of the things he's consuming come from mostly black countries.
That's right.
It's just incredible to me. So I just wanted to share that with you by way of, again, personal connection and remembrance growing up there.
Look at England today. Two of the most powerful, popular food is Chinese and Indian.
Right.
Not fish and chips.
Right. That's so true. That's so true.
The people in Europe is fighting over the fish, and the Scottish people can't control it because the fish come from the coast of Scotland. But they control the food they eat. Everything comes from abroad.
Right.
So the food come from Spain and Portugal and Italy.
And this whole Brexit thing, and there was all of this, and I don't know if you remember this, but when the negotiations were coming to a fever pitch in late December of 2020, a lot of the things that held up this so-called Brexit deal, which is, in my view, sir, a Brexit nightmare, was people were haggling on the British side about fish. And as you point out, fish is not even something that the British even have a big corner of the market on, So it's incredible that they were haggling over fish as a big sticking point. And yet fish is very little of what the English, market is. It's just bizarre to me.
Yeah.
Oh, dear. It's incredible.
But the hypocrites, historically, they preach one thing and they do something else. I mean, slavery was abolished in 1833, but it didn't become a reality until 1852, and all because an MP, when the Parliament bill was going through, used the word slowly. Slowly. How can you abolish slavery slowly? And they were Christians. And I don't know if you know, but the first slave ship that went with slaves to the West Indies, excuse me, was called Jesus Christ.
Oh, I did not know that.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So when they say, come to Jesus Christ, it's the slave ship they were walking towards, and they ended up in the West Indies.
Wow. I had no idea. I'm glad that, I don't know how many people watching or listening had any idea of that, but that's something I had no idea of, Doctor.
Well, the irony about it, I mean, I find it as an irony. At Christmas time, they sing the I'm dreaming of a white Christmas.
Right.
At Christmas time, all their Santa Claus are white. Even when he comes down the chimney, he's still fucking white.
Right. Oh, dear. Yeah, this is... I remember all of that. Yeah, they were still white, yeah. Oh, dear. I was going to ask you something else, and then unfortunately, the question just popped out of my mind. So unfortunately, oh dear, I don't remember what it was. But I'm sure that after the conversation, it will come up. But it's been such an honor, sir. I don't know if there's any things that you wanted to say in terms of what kind of advice you would give to people today. Anything that you wanted to comment on before we end our conversation today?
Well, all I say to my black brothers and sisters, our struggle is our struggle. We can't depend on other people to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. But we can enlist the help of other people. Like when I set up the Free University of Black Studies, I needed finance, I needed help. So I went to the World Council of Churches in Geneva and spoke at their meeting. And, Christians being Christians, they gave me £2,000, which I used to buy books when I came back to England. And they allowed me to use one of their premises in Gower Street near Tottenham Court Road. And that's where we used to hold our meetings. Monday, we used to do studies on Africa. Wednesday, we studies on Asia. And on Fridays, study on the Caribbean. And that's how it all started. And I've lived to see that the universities of Britain have introduced the Black Studies into their curriculum. And now they're getting rid of it because they haven't got money, they can't afford it. What has that got to do with slavery? When you were making money, did you give us any benefit from it? No, you're not making money, you're closing down the little institutions we set up. But then that's the Europeans for you. I mean, look at Brazil.
Right.
70% of the population are African.
That's right.
Look at Portugal, look at Brazil. And when the Spaniards and the Italians were fighting over South America, after Columbus discovered, how can you discover something that already existed there?
Right.
Columbus discovered the West Indies.
You see, this book
And he
here,
heard Alexander.
They Came Before Columbus by Ivan Van Sertima. Really important book for listeners and viewers. Yes, sir. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, Columbus discovered the West Indies. And when Columbus heard that Alexander the Great had arrived at the River Indus, he said, well, if that's in the East, this is in the West, and look at what's called West Indies. You know, it didn't look like Indians. They're Arawaks, they're Caribs. In Barbados, you got the Indian house.
Right.
It's all their part of history.
Exactly. Absolutely. Wow. This is such a treat and an honor and a privilege. Jenny Lawther
and when they had the dispute, when the
Yes.
Spaniards and the Italians couldn't get on, they couldn't decide. They decided to go to the Pope. So the Pope took a rule and put it on a map of the world and said that is Spaniards and this is Portuguese. And they call it Papal Bull. And that's how South America was divided. That's why Brazil, being the largest country in South America, has a border with every other West Indian country. Look at Guyana. We are geographically we're in South America, but we're West Indies.
Right.
I mean, it's a joke.
Right.
But in those days, we didn't know anything, or nobody wanted to hear what we had to say, but we still survived. We're here.
Right. Absolutely.
And we used to sing "God Save the Queen," "Long may she live to rule over us." We were con, man. We were con, ancestors were con. Because the first university in the world was not in Oxford and Cambridge. The first university in the world for secular learning was in Spain, when Spain was ruled by the North Africans.
The Moors,
everybody seemed to forget it.
Right.
They built the first university in the world for secular learning. Not Oxford, not Cambridge. Right. A lot of our history was destroyed, and a lot of our history had no marks given to it, because they had to justify our insecurity and our stupidity, and that's why we didn't have any history. But we got a lot of history. We got a hell of a lot of history behind us.
We most certainly do.
Yeah. We'll get there.
We will. Sir, it's been one heck of an honor. It really has. Dr. Roy Sawh and Jenny Lawther. What a wonderful couple you are. And I hope that people watching really get to appreciate how wonderful and lovely you are together. And for those listening, I hope that you're listening to both of them. you get a sense of the wonder and the love and the companionship and the relationship of two very special people. And it's been my distinct honor to be able to speak to both of them on this edition of the Politicrat Daily Podcast. Thank you both so very much for being here all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Thank you so much, Dr. Sawh, and thank you.
And thank you very much for organizing, and it's nice to know you. Whereabouts in London you live?
Oh, I lived in Pinner, Middlesex. It was in northwest London. And that would be the Metropolitan line on the tube station. So I would travel into central London from there on weekends to go out and things like that. But yeah, that's Pinner, Middlesex, kind of like the London borough of Harrow. I don't know if you're familiar with that area.
Yes, I'm familiar with Pinner, because I think I went to a meeting there once many years ago. Some Indians were having some problems. I live in Turnpike Lane.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, good. Great. It's just...
So when we come back to London...
Yeah, he's not there anymore.
You're not there, otherwise we could met. You're in America.
Right now, presently, I am in San Francisco, California, but I do go back to London every year. Obviously, this year that's not going to happen, and last year it didn't happen either.
Yeah, you know the feeling.
Yeah, right. So whenever the possibility of the time to travel comes again, it would be wonderful to meet you both in London or in Melbourne, since I've never been to Melbourne, Australia before. I've never been to Australia before. It would be really great to talk to you both, buy you dinner, or drinks. I don't know.
No, you don't buy me dinner. You don't buy me dinner. You come home and I'll cook a dinner for you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd be honored to be your guest. Thank you so much.
That's why we don't have restaurants in the West Indies. West Indians don't go to restaurants. We have our own restaurants when you drop in. If you're eating and you drop in, you eat with us.
Ah, yes, indeed.
We don't have telephones to ring you. If you're passing, drop in, you'll have to drink.
Right. Oh, such a wonderful joy. This is a wonderful, wonderful time that we have spent here. So I do wish you both all the very best, and goodness and love, health, peace, everything that sustains you in this world. Thank you so much, and I do hope we get the chance to meet and talk again. Thank you very much for your time today.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I hope we can continue this.
Absolutely. Thank you. I am so honored, and I know I say this for every guest, and I mean this about every guest. I am especially honored to have spoken with Jenny Lawther and Dr. Roy Sawh. And I do urge all of you to familiarize yourself with his work, his speeches, his oratory, and his mission. Black liberation. And a freedom fighter for the liberation of black people. Dr. Roy Sawh. His book is called From Where I Stand. Make sure you get your hands on a copy of that book. Thank you so much again for your time. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.